Welcome back, everyone. This is Chris from the Paint and Glory blog and our YouTube channel, of course. A new video on World War I for Blood and Valor. Specifically, today we're going to be talking about painting French infantry mid-late war uniforms, since their early war uniforms were, well, quite different, and we'll see that in a second. And I'm going to be painting these in 28 millimeter, although I think the rules that I'm talking about here, or rather the guides, would work really well for 15 millimeter. You just simplify some of the steps a little bit, and this would work really great. It's in 15 millimeter. Your details are going to be dialed back a little bit compared to 28. There won't be as many bips and bobs to do, but overall, I think these should work for any of those medium to large scales that you might be playing at. So, like I said, why are we talking about mid to late war uniforms? Well, that one over on the left, that's the early French uniform. It's practically out of the Franco-Prussian War or the Napoleonic era. I mean, the hats are a little less crazy. Bright red pants, relatively bright blue jacket and hat before they realized maybe helmets are a good idea. And so an early war French uniform, I'll tell you, they look fantastic in a really strange sort of way. But I wanted to go with something that was maybe a little more universal because as you see, once we hit 1915 and then 16, 17, 18, there's one thing going on that's really consistent with uniforms, and it's this light bluish gray color, and that's got a special name. It's called horizon blue. It was a new uniform color the French were developing. It had been in development since the early 1910s. It hadn't quite gotten rolled out into the actual infantry by the time the Great War starts in 1914. There's a lot of different stories about why this light blue color was chosen, especially because a lot of the other uh, militaries of the time were adopting kind of the more camouflage-ish browns or khakis or greens that then really take hold overwhelmingly by the end of World War One and of course World War Two. Why did French go with blue? There's a lot of stories. The research out there, I'm not going to say it's conclusive. You can go out there and do a little looking of your own. But I will say for wargaming table, no army in World War One or World War Two or any modern day is going to look like the French, right? You got a light blue uniform and you got machine guns. You just don't really see that much. You have the colorful uniforms back in the 1700s and the 1800s, but you don't have that in the 20th century. But with the French, you do just a little bit. Um, Additionally, one thing I'll mention is you'll see in these photographs, all of these blues change a little bit. You never see quite the same color of horizon blue twice. And then that happens because this is the early 20th century, and although industrialization has really kicked in, there's not a lot of standardization in the industrial production of these uniforms. So a lot of dyes of what were officially the same color, they were made by different manufacturers. They had different tones of blue in them, and a lot of cloths faded in the field, and they would get coated in mud, and they might get washed, and then they get washed again. And so there's not really one official color of horizon blue. And if anyone tells you that, it, they can argue forever, and maybe there's an official one in a book somewhere, but what it was actually out on the battlefield was a variety of different light blue gray colors. You can see the pants were all these sorts of different colors. In 1915 there was a dark blue pants, and then they went to horizon blue pants. The puttee, the leg wraps, those were also horizon blue, but of course those are more subject to wear and tear, being down near the ground and getting muddy, so they're going to look a little bit different. Feel free to use whatever shade of horizon blue you think looks best or that you have easy access to, because getting a perfect historical color match is not only difficult, it's really kind of impossible. So let's actually go on to the painting. So step one, of course, is priming, and I forgot to take a photo of my primed miniature, so I'm sorry about that. I just used a generic white spray. I believe it was Krylon. I bought it at Michael's. I wanted to go with a lighter color primer rather than a black or a gray, to try to help push up the brightness of the light blue color and also the khakis that are going to be in this uniform. You could go with a gray. I think that's fine. I would not go with a black. It's going to dull everything down. It's not the end of the world if you sprayed it black, if that's what you have, but I would try to go with a medium or lighter color. By the way, those two chaps right there, the reenacting World War One, where I'm going to leave them in these on the left side of my presentation here, just kind of as a guide. So you can see, hey, there's a lot of blue going on there, but there's some other stuff too. You got those darker boots, you've got the leather and the khaki straps. You've got their rifles, of course. So we're going to use them as a little bit of a guide. And I'm also going to apologize in advance. I'm just going to be showing you pictures. I did not record this, nor do I really have a setup for video recording. So we're just going to be kind of going through this step by step with these photos. So once we've got it primed, where I'm actually going to start is I'm going to start with the skin and the hair, but not the skin everywhere. Um, I'm going to really focus on the face. And the reason I do this is because, as you can see, the face is surrounded by both the collar and the helmet. And if I tried to go in and paint the face and also the hair and the back of this guy's head after I painted his uniform color and his helmet, I am inevitably going to get skin and hair color all over that freshly painted uniform. And so what this is called is working from the inside out. You start with the deepest parts, the parts that are going to be the hardest to reach later and are going to be most likely for you to screw up. So I work with mostly Army Painter paints. That is the range I started with, although I am slowly expanding into some Vallejo color that I really like Vallejo. I'm picking them up a little bit at a time there. So I'm just going to say, assume all the paints I'm using are from the Army Painter range, unless I say otherwise specifically. I also have a list of all the paints that I use at the end of this video. This miniature in particular, this is from Gripping Beast, specifically their Woodbine Design Company World War I line. And this is their French army with the Adrian head. They come with separate heads, but you can also get French heads that can make your soldiers Zouaves, Senegalese, Marines. They can have kepis. They can be Foreign Legion with kind of a pith helmet-like kind of thing, and also a head that's called a light. It looks kind of like a beret. I'm not 100% sure what is there based on the photo. So moving on to the painting, the skin tone I'm using here is Barbarian Flesh, again by Army Painter. It's a really nice medium Caucasian skin tone that leaves a lot of room for a wash to darken it down, but also to be highlighted back up. The hair there, that is the Monster Brown Army Painter color. It's kind of a lightish brown. You can feel free to mix up the hair and the facial hair colors for all of your minis, but for this guy, I went with a lighter color. It might be a little light compared to actual human hair color, except for people with very light brown hair, but the wash is going to tone that down. And also remember, when you're dealing with these small scale models, you generally want these colors to be a little brighter than they are in reality, just because at that small scale, you really need to push your highlights and your contrasts in order to make things stand out. I'm also going to say at this point, how many layers you need to do here really depends on the opacity of your paint and its coverage. I find that Army Painter paints almost always need a second coat of paint to give me full coverage, and that's what I have here with the skin tone and the hair colors, the mustache and the back of his head. There's 2 layers there. When I'm using Vallejo paints, I usually find their coverage is excellent, and I can often get away with just 1 layer. And even if some of the higher points on my model still show a little bit of white underneath my color, that actually helps me bring out my highlights. And that's one of the reasons why I used a white primer, because in the next step, I'm going to paint the uniform, that blue. And so if a little bit of white peeks through that blue, it becomes kind of a lighter blue. I have a natural highlight there. And thus, it's really going to help me push up my highlights. And the wash will bring down my shadows. So that is okay. We're also going to go back and cover a lot of this stuff later with some extra layers. So if you have any white hiding through, showing through, it'll be covered up. Now moving on to the vast bulk of this figure, it's going to be the horizon blue. This goes onto the uniform, this goes onto the helmet, and this goes onto the leg wraps, also known as puttees. I am using the Vallejo model color French Mirage blue, which is supposed to be colored matched to the World War I French uniforms. Remember, there is no one official horizon blue. There are a lot of different similar horizon blues. So if you don't have access to French Mirage blue by Vallejo, or you just don't want to buy another blue, use any blue that you think kind of matches this lightish bluish gray that the French were going for. Or, of course, you can mix blue and gray until you find something you're happy with. It just might be a little hard to replicate if you were going back to that. If you have a figure with a cloth covering on the helmet, as one of the example photos earlier in the video showed, that will be painted in khaki. I don't have any of those. The French actually phased them out after a little while because they found, what I read is they found that bullets or shrapnel that hit the helmet pushed the dirty cloth into the wound, and that actually increased the risk of infection. And the helmets weren't particularly reflective anyway, especially once they get all covered in dirt and grime. So the cloth coverings in khaki were not really all that necessary. Now, normally, if I was painting, I would move on and I would paint the rest of the various bits and bobs around this guy, like his straps, his ammo pouches, the rest of his skin, his rifle. But in this case, because the wash I'm going to use, I really only want it to go on the blue stuff, and it's going to get on everything. We're actually going to put the wash on next, and this is a blue-black wash. I'm using a mix of Army Painter's dark tone, blue tone, and the wash mixing medium. I did experiments with dark tone on its own, which is a black wash, blue tone, a blue wash, obviously, and a little bit of that mixing medium to kind of tone it down. I found the combination worked the best. And you can immediately see that we have so much more contrast between the depths of the shadows, or our false shadows, essentially, and the higher points because of this wash. You're going to want to let this settle in and dry for a little while. I usually let washes dry overnight just to make sure they're really dry, because if you go in there and you try to paint while the wash is still wet, it's going to do some bad things to your finish there. All right, moving on. Now we're going to want to do the rest of the figure, the rest of his equipment. So if you look at different pictures of French military, what the equipment is made out of varied by time period and also just soldier. The soldiers in the picture here appear to actually have leather cross straps and then some kind of cloth webbing. Whereas I've seen other photos where my figure, his webbing, his belt, and the straps that hold up his ammo belts, I have those in leather, and those were painted with Army Painter's leather brown appropriately. Whereas the bag, his bread bag, his canteen cover, which is, you can see it a little bit under his arm there, and also the straps that go along with the canteen and the bag. I painted those in Vallejo khaki. You could go ahead and use any tan or beige color. Again, this sort of cloth is going to fade a lot, and so really anything in the khaki to tan family or beige would be perfectly fine. Next, we're just going to finish up a couple of other things. We've got the rifle, the hands, and the boots. Again, boots could be a whole variety of different colors, usually brown. The French do not tend to have black boots. I went with a monster brown, which is a bit of a lighter color. It's actually the same color that his mustache and his hair is, but because they're on totally opposite sides of the figure, it's not really going to be an issue. And if it looks a little light for his boots, that will be darkened down once we put a wash on there. His hands, of course, get the same barbarian flesh as his face. The rifle got a couple different things going on there. The wooden parts of the rifle, which is going to vary depending on whether you've got like a Lebel or a Berthier or something else, those are going to be fur brown. I would check reference photos for what part of what rifle is wooden. The rifle strap is in leather brown, same as the leather parts of his belt. The metal parts of the gun and also the belt buckle, I did not paint those with a metallic paint. They were actually quite dull, as you can see in the reference photo of the two gents hanging out there. And so what I did is I painted those with Necromancer cloak. That is Army Painter's very dark gray. It is not quite black, but it is almost there. Vallejo is a similar color. I believe it's called German gray. And so, because we don't want to go with black, because you can't go down from black when we apply the wash, but we can go down from a very, very dark gray. So the wash will help that out. It let us add a little bit more contrast there. The next step is going to be a wash on the non-blue parts of the miniature. Now, you have to watch out. We're using a light brown wash. This is the soft tone from Army Painter. This is going on the flesh and the equipment, but you don't want to get this on the uniform, or it is going to lead weird brownish marks on the uniform that you'll have to go back and fix. So you might need to skip putting the wash on the leather webbing and the cloth straps that are going over the chest, because honestly, there isn't really any detail to pick out with the wash on the straps, and the blue wash has already picked up the shadows around the straps. We will go back and highlight those also, so we can get them a little more texture, but everything else on this is getting that light brown or sepia wash that is Army Painter's soft tone. I also forgot to mention back in the last picture that the hilt of the bayonet is in skeleton bone. I believe that the French use some sort of ivory or fake ivory kind of colored hilt for their label bayonets. But I would check with a reference photo for that, since they had different weapons with different bayonets. Now that we are done with all the base coats and the washes, if you were in a rush, you could really just stop here, finish the basing, and call it a day. But with a little bit more work, we can really make this figure pop. And so we're going to start adding some highlights, starting with the uniform. Now, the method I'm going to use is I'm going to go back to my original uniform color, Mirage Blue, because it's been darkened down quite a bit. And I'm going to go back over the uniform and the leg wraps and the helmet, and I'm going to cover about 75% of all of that with my original color. All right, so I'm going to cover up a lot of the darkened down color and just leave that last 25% that's hanging out in the recesses and the shadows. So places like inside the lines of the leg wraps, kind of underneath the folds of his jacket, inside where those buttons are, under the collar, under the various rims of the parts of the Adrian helmet, to give it that shadowed look. You could also, if you didn't want to go and give a wash all over and then go back and do the step, you could use a pin washing method where you use the dark blue black wash to specifically go into these various points. But I find that this gives it a better overall look, even if it is a little more labor intensive. Again, this would be a great place to stop, because now we did our base coat, we did our wash, we did one highlight. A little more work is going to make it look a little better. So we're going to give it another highlight. This time I'm going to take Army Painter's Stone Golem. That is a light gray. I don't want to put white into it because that's going to bring up my Mirage Blue too much. So I'm going to take my Mirage Blue and I'm going to take the Stone Golem light gray. I'm going to get a roughly 60-40 mix. I'm going to thin this out so it doesn't cover too much. It allows the original colors to still shine through a little bit. And then I'm going to go and I'm going to highlight about 25% of the blue parts of the figure, the uniform, the leg wraps, the helmet. This is where your highlighting is going to depend on the sculpt, but it's going to be parts that are edges, that are rays, that are pointing directly towards the sun, the rim of the helmet. You're looking, again, to pick this out. If you look at the picture of the man, the actual reenactor on the right, you can see the folds of his arms. You can see along the tops of each fold, you want the lightest part of your horizon blue. And in the folds, you're leaving those darker parts. Finally, if you want to stop now, I wouldn't blame you, but I'm a little crazy, so I'm going to go and do one more highlight, a third highlight. Now my mixture is about 25% horizon blue and 75% stone golem. It's a very light blue-gray. It's a little desaturated, and we're going to just highlight the very, very, very edges, like the very top of that helmet crest, the tops of his little epaulette things, thin strips along the folds of his uniforms. I know in this color it looks like I went a little overboard. I promise this picture, my phone had a little trouble with the exposure on this photo. I have slightly better photos later at later steps that are going to show you it's not quite as overblown. It didn't really go all the way up to white. Now we're going to highlight the rest of it, but I promise you we're really about 90% of the way done at this point. Now we're going to highlight the skin and also the rest of his kit. For the skin, I'm going to use the same technique where I'm going to take my original color of barbarian flesh, and I'm going to cover about 75% of his skin. I'm just going to leave the recesses kind of between his fingers, underneath kind of the hoods of his eyes, underneath his mustache, underneath his chin. I'm going to leave that as the shaded down barbarian flesh, and everything else is going to be this base barbarian flesh. And then I'm going to go with one more highlight. It's only a second highlight. I'm not doing 3 highlights this time. I'm taking Vallejo's basic skin. It's a very light skin tone. I'm going to mix that 50-50 into barbarian flesh. And I'm just going to highlight kind of the top corners of his cheekbones, his nose, maybe his chin, a little bit of it's protruding, some of his fingers and his knuckles. And that's it for the skin. For his kit, I'm going into the leather pouches and the webbing with Monster Brown. That's my light brown color I've been using. It just hitting it a little bit, not going too crazy there. For the cloth bag and also the canteen, I'm using the original khaki, again covering about 75% of what had been washed over. And then I'm using the Vallejo German Camo Beige World War II, which is like a light khaki on just the raised edges. I also realized at this point it's a very small detail in the picture in the middle where you look in his back. I completely missed the screw cap of his canteen, so I went back and hit that with Necromancer Cloak to be kind of like a dark metal screw cap. And then finally, with his rifle, I want to give it just a little bit of a metallic sheen. So I'm going to highlight in Vallejo air metal steel. I'm just going to hit the edges. I still want it to be mostly a dull, dark gray, but I just want, maybe the bolt handle and along the bayonet, I want that to have a little bit of metallic sheen on there. So we're done, except for the base. Now, if you're wondering what I used for the basing, that is a Liquitex product called Resin Sand. It works really great as a churned up earth, mud, rocks kind of look, very no man's land, Western front. I have a reference photo here from the movie 1917 where the two British chaps are crossing no man's land. Now, that movie is quite desaturated, whereas I'm going more of a contrasting look. So I realized that my Vallejo flat earth color is a little bit more saturated. It's got a little more hints of red in it, but on the tabletop, it looks really good. If you went as desaturated as the movie was, it would be quite washed out. It would actually kind of be distracting from the miniature, which is already very contrasting. I also then hit that with a watered down wash of Army Painter's Strong Tone. That's their dark brown wash, just to get into the crevices there. And then I black rimmed the base, and it is done. This is our final look from the front. Compared that to our reference photo of the two French men sitting there and enjoying a bit of a pipe. And I personally think it's pretty good. I don't think it's going to win any golden demons or crystal brushes anytime soon, but I'm pretty proud of it on the tabletop. And from behind, so you can see what's going on here. If there was anything I would change if I had to go back and do this, I think there's two things I would change. The first thing I would do is I find the uniform a little bit red. It's Army Painter's Fur Brown, and so I might use a slightly different brown there. Unfortunately, I don't really have a lot of other medium browns on my painting desk right now that weren't already in use. The leather brown, the monster brown. I have a darker brown, but that would have been far too dark, and I don't think it would have looked good. But maybe if I had an alternative brown, I could have used that. One other thing I think I would do is I tried to go for some texture. You could see on the back of the overcoat, I went with some little like micro scratch highlights to try to put a little cloth texture in there. From arm's length, you really can't notice them. They don't look as strong as they do there in the photograph, but I'm going to experiment with some other cloth painting techniques for the World War I Germans I've recently started working on. Maybe some light stippling effect using a kind of a cut down brush and stabbing at it to create some stippling, but I'm going to experiment with that. That's really the only two things I would change about this model. Otherwise, I'm fairly happy with it. If you just want a big list of all the paints that I used, here it is. One of the great things about the French as opposed to the Germans is there's really only 14 paints on here. It's not a ton, and if you were in a pinch, you could probably collapse some of these paints down. You can maybe use the same leather, the same brown color for a lot of the boots and the hair and the leather straps. You could maybe ignore the skeleton bone color for the hilt of the bayonet. You could just say it was metal, and you could even cut a couple of colors from this and probably still be fine. So thank you very much, everyone, for watching. I appreciate it. If you have any questions about painting World War I French, leave a comment in the comment section below. And I'm currently working, as I said, some World War I Germans. They're working as Atlantic figures, so I will have a video on how to paint World War I Germans, late war Germans, out in a couple of weeks. I'm also working on continuations of the So You Want to Play series for Blood and Valor World War I. This has been Chris from the Paint and Glory YouTube channel. So thank you very much, everyone, for watching.